I'm Joshua Adams, and this is the Industry Insights Podcast, where I am joined in the Rock Paper Simple studio by community leaders as we dive into industry topics and perspectives. Thanks for joining us today. I have Stanley Brizz, Executive Director of Brevard Prevention Coalition. Stanley, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Today we're going to talk about collaboration, something we're both very passionate about, something that both of our organizations do a lot of. And so one of the things that I've noticed about you yourself, but also your organization, is kind of this angle. You approach everything with collaboration, right? You're always engaging other organizations, other nonprofits, other businesses, totally other industries as you're approaching your mission, as you're approaching making an impact on the community, and something that I really appreciate. But I noticed that most things you do, you're doing in collaboration with another organization. And I see that's being pretty powerful to your mission. So I'd love to hear, we're going to talk a little bit about why that is, kind of your thoughts on that. But before we do that, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your mission, right? Why you do what you do, why you get up in the morning, why I know your schedule's as bad as mine. We're always running around. You're always trying to, take that next call, get the next thing done, but you're doing it because there's a reason, there's a mission there. So let's talk a little bit about that. And then I'd love to talk collaboration.
Absolutely. Definitely busy, which is good. Our mission really is to get into the community to make sure that anything that we can possibly do to reduce the likelihood of substance use disorder being just basically proliferated throughout the community, if I could say that as a word, is done. And so that takes collaboration. You have to get into businesses. You have to get into the medical community, law enforcement. Everybody is affected by that. And so if you look on our website and look at our mission statement, it really is to make the community a healthier, happier place where people can enjoy their lives better. I always say I don't believe we are miracle workers, that we're going to completely eradicate substance misuse or addiction and all its effects in 5 years or something like that. But there's nothing wrong with trying to make your community better piece by piece. If you can impact one life out of 5, let's say, in a positive way and change the trajectory of that person's life or their family's life, why would you not do that? So some people, I don't want anyone thinking we have a God complex, or some of the, some of people that really want to help, some of the people who really want to do a lot. Sometimes we put too much on ourselves and make unrealistic expectations. So the collaboration piece, to go back to that, is really, you cannot be effective as a coalition without coalescing or bringing people together to make a coalition. And who are those people? It's the people that you're trying to utilize in the community to promote your message, but also the ones you're trying to help.
So what, obviously you had this idea of collaboration from the get-go because you called it a coalition, right? There's like a fundamental aspect there. So tell me where that comes from, right? Why collaboration? Obviously there's some experience you've had or some reasoning behind that. So why a coalition?
Well, it started with my affiliation with the previous organization I worked for. Did a lot of work in prevention, and just looking at that and seeing the effect it had in a positive sense on the community, on young people. I worked as the director for this area for Accurate Connects for years, and still they're part of the coalition as an agency, amongst others. But seeing that and seeing that coalitions existed and that they mobilized the community in such a powerful way, from grassroots all the way up to corporations, it's really why I said, well, we need a coalition here. And I actually did those in tandem. So I was working that job and doing the coalition at the same time. I don't want to say I started in the ultimate sense the coalition, because the coalition wasn't an organization in Brevard County. It was more of a committee led by another agency. And I ended up being a member of that through my previous affiliation with Accurate Connects. And while I was a part of that, the buck kind of got passed to me.
Isn't that how it always works?
To lead the coalition. And then as the opioid crisis came fuller into view, and I want to say fuller into view for this area, well, maybe around 2016, 2017 is when I took things to the next level. To really say, let's start an opioid misuse task force. Let's formalize the coalition. And so that very next year period, around 2018, is when I made it a 501c3 while still working my other job and kind of working those things together so that we could be more powerful together.
Gotcha. So I think one of the things you said there that really kind of got me was this word mobilization, right? And so you hit on, hey, mobilizing the community, right? And so in your mind, what does that look like, right? And obviously I asked the question about collaboration, but that was kind of where you were headed with that. Hey, we're mobilizing the community. So tell me about what that looks like. What does that look like in practice? Tell me about mobilizing the community.
It looks like a lot of things. Isn't that a vague answer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Looks like a lot of things. But really, it is looking at the different sectors of the community and figuring out what they can do, how they can help. Everyone wants to help. You just have to show them how they fit into the piece. So it looks like going to different businesses, going to different social services providers, going to the medical community, going to law enforcement, going to educators, our school district, and showing them how the problem impacts them, but also having an idea of what you want them to do. And interestingly, that's the hardest thing because there's so much to do. So you got to sit down and brainstorm. What can they really do and bring it to them? For instance, with the school district, you might say, okay, I have this really neat youth-focused campaign that I think they can introduce to their students if they're open to it. Or I've got a student-focused group that I want to start, or a student youth group that I want to start, where the youths can be messengers themselves because they know how to message and market their own age group better than we do.
So that's true, isn't it?
So those are examples of how you do. Or I want to go to law enforcement and offer them training or opportunities to train, or maybe we can do or apply for a grant that can bring them into spaces where they can learn how to do their jobs more efficiently or can improve their access to resources. We do a lot on stigma reduction. There's a huge stigma around addiction, even the prevention side. And that's what we are, Brevard Prevention Coalition. But I've seen the prevention field grow to where it's not just about prevention in the purest sense of you see a 5-year-old or 6-year-old and you make sure that they have all the protective factors they need in the hopes that they won't later resort to substance use to cope. That's very important. That's still a part of prevention. But I'm seeing now the need for generational prevention where we have parents now that have grown up in an era of the opioid crisis. Maybe they had an issue with it. Maybe a family member had an issue with it. So getting them treatment resources is also another way of collaborating with parents as a sector to help kind of push down that prevention, those protective factors and messaging, to strengthen them as a family so that their kids can see a better path forward, maybe than what they could have seen in the household.
Right.
So there's so many different factors. So it's really broad what we can do.
And I think as you become more comprehensive when you're tackling any kind of issue, right, any kind of crisis, any kind of element in the community that you're saying, I want to see change here, right, which is something that you're doing. Anytime you're tackling something that frankly is generational, the complexities of it go through the roof. Right.
Yeah.
Whether that be prevention in this case, whether that be homelessness, whether that be any of these other major issues that historically have been tackled at a symptom level, right? Historically, both of those topics, I picked two big ones there. And the homelessness one is near and dear. I was just at a board meeting this morning discussing how we tackle that. And something I was really walked away encouraged this morning as we were looking at historically this organization that I'm a part of has tackled it from the standpoint of serving homeless mothers, right? And with children, right? And there's always this like tag with children. And for years, this organization has focused on that, but recently they've been focused more on the kids. And it's been really interesting. Just this morning, we had the team member that's been heading that up share some stories about some ways that they've served these kids prior to even going into the school system and giving them a better chance at breaking a cycle before they even get into the school system, which is incredible to me, right? And you're talking about some of the same ideas of how do we break this cycle. And I think when you look at that, that comes back to the collaboration bit because it's a bigger piece than any one organization can handle. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that, tackling a larger issue. Again, it becomes generational, right? Because we're getting away from that symptom bit, going generational and all the pieces of that.
Yeah, that's a large topic. We could talk all day on that. A good thing about where we live is that there are tons of nonprofits, tons of social service providers, all trying to address their respective pieces. And what we do is that we try to bring them all together, at least underneath the prevention realm. and you mentioned it and stated it very clearly, that it touches every individual industry, right? And so because of that, coming together and figuring out, okay, how can I collaborate with this particular agency to help, and how can they collaborate with me to help? I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that all of us can definitely help one another in our missions. Sometimes we want to take it all on. I think there's a space for that. I actually sit on the advisory council for what they call the continuum of care for the Brevard Homeless Coalition as well, because there's a piece of homelessness impacted by addiction and mental health, obviously. And so some of that creates a challenge because you're thinking, okay, I want to do all of this. We got to deal with the people that are experiencing homelessness. We have to deal with individuals that may be, having mental health issues. We want to deal with people who are having employment issues. Like, all of these things can be impacted. And so you got to narrow your focus a little bit, but still be present everywhere.
Right. Right. No, and I think that also allows you to tackle parallel missions, right? So you can have organizations with missions that are on the surface very different, but actually, if you put them in parallel, you realize, oh, wait a minute, we're actually can tackle two things at once. We can leverage those resources. I'm reminded of an idea we're working on now to align a couple missions, right? How do we align this idea of prevention in the community, this idea of creating another outlet, but also another organization that says, hey, I want a better connection with first responders in the community, right? How do we get both of those missions aligned very well? If you can tie them together, and all of a sudden now you're leveraging two audiences, you're leveraging two sets of resources, two groups of people, right? And so I think that's where we have to remember very, very often you'll find organizations like yours, and frankly, even business organizations have similar missions, right? It's good for the business community to have a healthy community. It's good for that aspect. As the community grows, business benefits, right, from that as well. And so that I think that's something that we sometimes separate all that. We say, oh, the nonprofits over here, business sector over here, right? All these things are separate, but they're really not. They kind of come together in this convergence, if you will.
Siloing is a problem. It's always been. And it's not necessarily born out of any selfishness. It's truly, you have your organization, you have your staff, your team, your mission, and you focus on that. Some people are really good at collaborating, and that's great. But even when you collaborate, at times it can be hard to figure out, okay, how much can I collaborate? Am I collaborating to the extent that I'm being, detrimental to my organization to some degree? Or so it's a lot of that. I think I would really appreciate, and we've had attempts at it in the past, if we did have a full, hey, let's everybody come together, nonprofits, and then some days we have the business people in there as well, and let's put all the issues out on the table. I think Space Coast Health Foundation had a really cool venue for that at one point. I know they still do, like social determinants of health or different things, and different work groups to do that. But sometimes that would be really, really appreciated to continue to have that venue. It's hard to do. Everyone's busy. We all have different priorities, different things happening at once. So it's not an easy thing. It's like a perfect world scenario. But I also put a lot of importance on trying to be plain spoken about what we're trying to do. Not to segue too far into something different, but I think when you're collaborating, but also when you're trying to get your message out to the community, we get into this esoteric language, and it's ironic I use a word like esoteric when I'm trying to describe something. It's more relatable, but we do, because we have to write this language into grants. We get very collegiate, and
there you go again.
There I go again, and misusing a word. But we get very, very academic about things, which is good. It shows you're competent. But I'm really trying to reach the communities. I'm trying to reach the people that are not in our industries per se, as well as those who are in our industry. And I just want to come out and say to people, hey, this is a problem. It's affecting everybody in your family. Everybody, whether they have a direct issue or not with it, they're affected somehow. They work with someone, they go to school with someone. They may have an idea, but it's there. How can I show you this affects you, and what can you do to help us, and how can we help you whether it's directly for your family or someone else. It's kind of like how you want to frame those things. I want to go to businesses and do the same thing and say, this is an issue. It affects you economically. You know how much funding goes into this support? Some of it, your tax dollars. Do you know how, it impacts the local municipalities, our policing, the strain it puts on our hospitals and emergency departments when people don't have adequate access to care, or because of stigma, they have not wanted to talk about their addiction issue. So it gets worse and they end up coming back to the hospitals again, either from overdosing or from drug poisoning where they didn't intend to take something that they weren't supposed to take, or weren't intending to take something they didn't intend to take, I guess is what it was. So there's a lot of pieces, you can go into different spider web lines of talking about that stuff. But that to me are the challenges of sitting in the room and saying, okay, this is what we all do. How can we pull this together and leverage that, as well as the messaging? You come to someone and says, hey, I want to talk about addiction. They're like, oh, I don't have that problem. Or, hey, I want to talk about preventing addiction. Oh, our families doesn't have that issue. I'd say, okay, that's great, but let me show you how it affects you.
And I think that's the parallel missions we talked about, right? And understanding the things we care about in the community do affect each other. It's all connected, right? All of these things are connected. I think some of the barrier to entry for collaboration in an environment, especially in the nonprofit space, is that doesn't resonate with me, or that doesn't speak to me, or and I understand that, right? We're all passionate about certain things a little bit more than others, but I think we start to see the connecting of the dots. You start to go, oh, okay. I really love, there's another nonprofit leader in the area that I've spoken to, and she was saying when she first took over that one of the comments that was made on their SWAT with the organization was, as a threat, was other nonprofits, right? And she was like, absolutely not. That is not a threat. That is an opportunity, right? And she moved it onto the other. And I think that is a great way to shift that thinking, because that idea of looking at other organizations as a threat is really one of the reasons that collaboration doesn't happen.
I agree with you. I might have been in the room when that SWAT was done.
You were in the room, yes.
Because I thought that same thing. But a lot of nonprofits feel that way, especially the smaller you are, the less resources you feel you have access to. There is a limited amount of funding, so to speak, or finite. Maybe limited is not the right word, but there's a finite amount, especially when you're dealing with donors and who has the funds to give in a large way. But like you said, those are opportunities, like was mentioned by the facilitator of that SWOT analysis, because how can you partner? We've been doing that a lot lately where, okay, we want to go after this particular funding. I'm sure this other agency might want to go after this particular pot of funding as well. Maybe we can partner on it and meet both of our missions in one way or the other, right? And or maybe we can let that agency go for it and find a way to support it, which is sometimes hard for an agency to do where you're looking for funding everywhere as a nonprofit agency. So it's reframing it. That's really an excellent point. It's not a threat, it's an opportunity. If we're truly doing this for a community reason. Now, granted, you have to pay bills, you have to pay salaries. You're a nonprofit in the sense that the purpose of your organization is philanthropic or humanitarian, but you still have to bring in funding to pay your overhead and things of that nature. There are issues with certain grants, the way they're formulated. I think they're a little archaic, and you need people to fulfill the mission. And a lot of them they'll give you thousands of dollars to buy paper clips and crayons and paper, but maybe not enough to actually bring in people to get boots on the ground and knock on the doors and do the work of the coalition or do the work of the nonprofit. So I agree with you 100% on that. Other agencies are opportunities, not threats. How can we coalesce, come together, and act that way? The coalition is structured that way purposefully. We have member agencies. So when we host, for instance, our opioid misuse task force, we invite every agency to come and sit in there. Everyone has a, stake in this. We invite other providers, people from different domains, other nonprofits, come on in and let's talk about this. We want to be a resource to the community. We want to be able to benefit the community in any way possible. And that only happens if those individuals are in the room.
So Stanley, something that I've heard you mention often is stigma. And I do think stigma can be a huge barrier to collaboration. So What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. It can be. So stigma against addiction, or stigma with addiction, stigma with anything that has to do with substance misuse, drug use, alcohol use, it prevents people from talking about it because they think, okay, this is in my family, or this is maybe an issue that they themselves may be dealing with. And people traditionally will look down on that, right? And when it comes to collaborating with organizations, even people who are in other nonprofits, surprise, have ideas. They may have stigma against that topic. And so when you approach someone with that, they may say, oh, okay, thanks for approaching me about collaborating, but our people don't have problems with drugs. You hear disparaging terms that some people may not know about, may take an education. For instance, like, oh, they're a drug addict, they're a junkie. And so in the field of addiction, we've moved away from those terms. So it's substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, if you're talking specifically about opioids. There's alcohol use disorder, stimulant use disorder, and people who are battling addiction will use terms like that. Some people disagree with that even. There's stigma around how to address the issue. Oh, it's not a disorder, it's a personal choice. And so because of that, you'll get people who don't want to really get into your sphere. Like, oh, I understand what you do, all the best, but it's not really something, those people just need to get their lives together. And although there is some personal choice that goes into addressing the issue of addiction, we want to get in front of people to educate them on why that's so hard, that there's a neurological change that occurs, especially the younger someone started using. We all like to talk about young people and their frontal lobes aren't fully developed. So imagine someone at 11, 12 years old starting to use a very powerful substance frequently, regularly. It's going to change some of their neural pathways, decisions they make. They may be able to hold down a job, but they may not be able to make other logical decisions that you feel are easy. Like, just stop doing that. Why do we all set these resolutions to say, okay, it's November 1st or it's, December 1st, and I'm going to start running every morning, or I'm going to start doing this, or I'm going to stop eating this kind of food, but we don't do it. So you amplify that a little bit. That's how hard it is to change behaviors and how hard it is to change thinking. It goes beyond just the behavioral. So we want to get the chance to sit in front of people and show them the brain graphs and show them the brain of someone who has been using for a while, who is, has addiction issues, and what it looks like when they've stopped using, how those areas of the brain light up again and become normal again, or closer to normal. We want to talk to them about the steps it takes to really make that change. And it's not as simple at a certain point of saying yes or no. We want to talk to people about the fact that people don't use to get high at a certain point. At a certain point, they have to use in their minds to stay well. And I say in their minds, I don't want to make it seem like it's just mental. Physically, when they're going through withdrawals, it's a challenge for them. And so they feel they have to. And so we want to put the resources out in the community on that treatment side to, once again, like I mentioned earlier, help those individuals struggling. A lot of them are parents, they're older siblings, they're trying to set good examples for their family members, their younger siblings. And that's a huge part of prevention for me. But we also want to let people know that your youth, your child, your family is impacted by this. And if we get everybody front-loaded, or as many people as possible, to be realistic, front-loaded with these, what we call protective factors, what can we get them involved in so that when they are stressed out, for a coping mechanism, the first thing they run to isn't a substance. Or if they're shown that that's a coping mechanism, they have what they need. They're armed with the information they need to say, you know what, I'm going to go toward my music, my art, my friends. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to talk to my family. I'm going to get involved in something else, or I'm going to find a way to divert my energy into using something more healthful to cope. So that's the prevention side of it, because everybody's at risk.
So I think kind of another way to phrase what you're saying is perspective, right? And I think that a stigma can evolve or come out to be because we don't see a perspective. We're missing that other angle, that other look at what's going on. Something that I feel was really integral to my personal development years ago was understanding how important perspective is, right? And I think it's easy to look at the world through the lens of our experiences, what we understand to be true, and just decide that's truth. That's total truth, right? And we forget that maybe there's something we're missing. Maybe there's another idea, maybe there's another experience that we haven't seen. And I think that's where stigmas start to flow from, right? This starts to happen because it's like, I never even considered, if that makes sense. And actually, I experienced it. It was 2017. I was involved in a social simulation. Right, we did a social simulation. It's called SimSoc, if you're familiar. And there's a lot of rules about what I'm not allowed to share because when you go through it, you're supposed to do it for the first time. But what I will share is it allowed you to look at things. You saw things through the simulation from one angle. At the end of the simulation, you saw the other perspectives, and you're like, oh my gosh, I had made a lot of assumptions throughout this whole thing. And I see that too with the stigmas, right? You don't see that perspective. And as we've worked together and I've seen you talk about the different angles, it's like, I never even thought of that. I never saw that. I never saw that side of it. And I think allowing others to see our perspectives is a huge part of it. There's a lot of social issues going on today, more than ever, right? With social media, we're able to talk about all these social issues that are going on and dynamics, et cetera. And one thing that I've really tried to focus on is reaching out to people who have a different perspective than I, right? I never saw this growing up, right? Or this social issue because of whatever reason, right? Tell me about it. Help me understand what you've gone through. And I tell you, I've had some really wild conversations where I've asked people of a certain social group or social understanding, tell me, hey, I don't understand this. Can you tell me what you're experiencing? From my experience, this isn't even an issue. This is not an issue at all. And I've said that almost jokingly, but then 60 minutes later, 90 minutes later, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that people were dealing with that, or that this had come up, or that I never would have thought you would have had this issue. And not in a negative way, but wow, if you're dealing with it, then who else is? So I think perspective is a big piece of this.
I agree. Your perception is your reality. A lot of people have different worldviews. You grew up in a certain area, a certain region, your worldview is going to be different than another person's. If you haven't experienced what that person experienced. People know that logically, but they don't always know that emotionally, or when it comes to social interaction. They don't think that way all the time. And sometimes it does take pausing. What you described is interesting because there is a graphic that I've used with different, speaking engagements and things I've done in trainings. And it has two people standing on the opposite ends of what looks like a 9. But from one person's perspective, it's a 6. From the other person, it's a 9. And they're pointing at it, absolutely convinced that it is what they see from their perspective. So at times, it takes us walking around to the other side, looking at it from their angle. We may not agree. We might still say, no, that's a 9. But I could see now why you think it was a 6, and I understand. Conversations, if we want to look at this from a macro level, people are not necessarily having conversations anymore. They're just firing words at each other, especially on social media. We've gotten out of the space like we are now, talking to one another. Social media, email, text messaging, and it's become more of just these, let me fire my thoughts at you and you fire your thoughts back to me. And a lot of times there's no room for that understanding, context, tone. So that's deeper than the topic we're speaking on today. But that goes back to that perspective and understanding people's perception, understanding their worldview. So I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I think we would see a lot more progress in many areas of our society if we were willing to take a moment and observe another perspective. Take a moment, and before I react to that situation, before I pass judgment on something, or before I choose to not be involved or to be involved, to say, what is that other perspective that I'm missing, right? Considering maybe there's something I'm missing. And I think that's something we forget to do because we think we have all the information. How many times have I thought, wow, I have all the information about a decision, and then find out, oh, there was one more layer. Oh, there was something else I didn't know about. Oftentimes you make a decision or you make a quick snap judgment and then realize, oh, I was missing a vital piece of information. That's a lot that comes with, it's a totally different topic, but kind of the conflict resolution is a lot about getting perspective, right? And I found that typically most disagreements, especially most professional disagreements, are happening because there's one piece of information missing. one bit of clarification that's just missing there. But I think that kind of coming full circle back, I think that's part of why that stigma can be a barrier to collaboration. But I think proper collaboration can lead to removing some of the stigma as well.
Exactly. And that's what the coalition is really about. Educating the community, everyone in the community, really about what the issues are facing us when it comes to addiction. What are all the contributory pieces that come into it so that they understand and they have that information to make the informed choice and have their opinions based on fact and not stigmatized facts or stigmatized thoughts about it or misinformation, just flat out misinformation. And so we do our best to get that out there in all sectors of society, one by one. We try our best to do it in organized fashion, but that's what we do. And with our collaborations, it's the same thing. So it is on us to show our collaborators or our potential collaborators what the message is about and not assume that they understand it. And once we do that, it makes it a lot more easier to partner and do those things. But that's what we're really about. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share that. It's getting people informed. Without that, it's a challenge to really get the support that you need.
And I think if you're doing it right, that collaboration approach, and that can really be a rallying flag to say, let's go make change. Let's go make a difference in our community. And it's really what you're trying to do with that. And I so appreciate about it. And I think if we're successful with listening well, creating opportunities to listen, to share, to build awareness, right, amongst each of these organizations, I think that collaboration can be a rallying flag that really kind of improves our community in a lot of different ways, right? And obviously the mission that you guys have, but a lot of other parallel missions.
Absolutely. I agree. It's stronger together, all of the things that sound cliche, but they're true. They come from somewhere because it's the truth. We can work together to move forward. A lot of times when we don't do that, we end up causing more frustration and trying to achieve our individual goals. So I'm all about it.
Yeah, we can get more done together, like you said, than separated.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Industry Insights. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, comment, or even drop us a line over at rockpapersimple.com.